Yeah. So as part of the report, we covered the three big trends that we identified were really driving investment in the region. One was fantasy sports. So guys, Vatsal and someone else had asked a question about that. We will cover that a bit more deeply now. Second is, of course, esports, and third is fitness. But what we also saw that there are these trends are specific to their region. So fantasy sports or fantasy cricket especially is huge in India. We've seen a lot of traction over there. Esports, while is big everywhere, but it's especially big in China because some of the biggest names in the space come from there. And fitness, of course, is part of a mega global trend. So we'll talk about that across the region. All right, same format as before. Keep all your questions in the questions tab, and we'll do our best to address them. So, like I said, fantasy sports in India, it's game time because this industry is really hotting up. Even though the IPL has now been postponed, rescheduled, thankfully for the given the other conditions. But prior to that, there's a reason that that Dream 11 raises the kind of money that it does. In fact, I think we have somebody from Dream 11 on our webinar today. So yeah, guys, if you're in there, feel free to jump in. Would love to hear from you directly. Esports in China, and especially there was one big thing that happened in that market. This merger between two gigantic companies, DouYu and Huya. If you know of them, then great. If not, they came together last year to form a $10 billion combined entity, the largest streaming company in esports in the world. And third is Asia Pacific, which you'd be surprised to know perhaps, is the fastest growing fitness market in the world as a region compared to North America, Europe, South America, etc. But first up, let's talk about fantasy sports in India. Jacob, you were talking about resources. That's one of them, Inc. 42, which Rishabh and I mentioned, which talked about growth of fantasy sports. This is also from a KPMG co-published report, which basically said something like fantasy sports has been growing like 200% year on year. I think there are well over 100 million subscribers. I think the number is far further. I have read reports, um, depending on the credibility of the resource, that this number is as big as 250 million and growing. And maybe the Dream 11 guys have even more data to suggest that it's even bigger than that. But the point being, that's a really, really wide base of users that are talking about fantasy sports or willing to play fantasy sports in India. Now, there is a lot of reasons for this. Of course, cricket is a mega sport. In fact, I read last year was it that the opening match of the IPL last year, not this year, IPL 2020, which was much delayed, of course, during the pandemic, was had the highest viewership for any opening game of any sports league in the world. Over 100 million people or something like that tuned in to watch the opening game of the IPL. So just to give you an idea that the cricket is big because of the scale that it produces. In fact, some of the franchises in the IPL are valued sometimes more than the biggest European football teams. I think some of the franchises worth 3.5, $4 billion as well. So at least they claim. So the point being, cricket is a mega market, all right, especially for people who are not from India over here. It's that's important for you to know. Another big driver of fantasy sports and why it's happened now and not, let's say, 5 or 10 years before, because cricket was always around. In fact, the broadcaster Star Sports had a fantasy platform called Super Selector, which I remember playing back in, I think it was 2006 or something like that. But it did take off in the same way that it has now. And one of the reasons for that is how the mobile internet penetration has the depth that it is in India, alongside digital micropayments, which have been facilitated, which is so easy to do. Same way that it has been working in China for so long, India is all about QR code payments. So you can go anywhere and flash money. Everybody is digitally banked or has access to transferring money in small amounts. That's the point. It's not just about big transfers with banks getting into it with big fees. It's about transferring small amounts, half a dollar, $0.25, $1, $2, etc., between providers. And of course, the chance to make real money, because these games, the way they're set up, is that you pay an entry fee to participate in the game, and then what you pull out of it is it's like winning. Once if your team that you've submitted wins the whatever, let's say, competition that you've entered, which might be one particular match, it might be for a shorter period of time. It's the chance to like get like really big money out, like significant multiples of your entry fee, 20, 30, 50, 100 times of the entry fee that you pay. So it's actually it's actually access to people because it plays to win real money, because it plays in the loophole of game of chance versus game of skill. um, and that's where fantasy sports allows people in India, even though bet gambling officially is illegal, sports betting is still illegal. We've seen legislation move in the past to try to legalize sports gambling. There's, I think, the Madras High Court or a high court in a city in India had passed legislation that there was thinking about, or there was certainly a movement towards legalization of sports betting. Hasn't happened yet. It might happen. It's been kind of in this might happening state for a while now. But without even going there, this game of chance versus game of skill loophole is where these companies exist. 212%, I said, right, which is the growth year on year. I mean, that's a big number. And if it continues to grow, but maybe not at that level every year, but given the base of people and how cricket mad this is a really, really, really big market, right? And now within this big market, who are the primary players? Yeah, there you go. Sorry. Team 11 is clear, far and away the market leader. That company has raised nearly $800 million. 400 million of that was in March of this year. And we've also seen other names emerge. Mobile Premier League and Winzo, which were primarily kind of gaming companies, like especially mobile gaming focused, but they also have, I think, one of their big pillars is fantasy sports. Mobile Premier League, in fact, raised 95 million. I think it was earlier in February of 2021 of this year. These companies are generating a lot of money. Not just that, they're also getting a lot of penetration because they have a lot of money to sign good, high quality cricketers for their brand endorsement deals. And BF famously has the cricket captain of India, Virat Kohli, on there. Dream 11 pretty much has everyone. Dream 11 is the title sponsor for the IPL. They've been investing a lot in and advertising, from MS Dhoni to AB de Villiers to a lot of premier cricketers, big names that you will see are signed up. But not just that, there are a lot of other platforms, smaller platforms, which will get other cricketers. So it's almost become every cricketer has some platform that they are endorsing, and there are other platforms like My 11 Circle or Paytm First Gives, which have big backing behind them, which are also investing a lot. So it's like this real battle that's happening in the fantasy sports space, and it's happening at a big scale. We can go on and on about Dream 11 themselves. I mean, that's 800 million funding that they're sitting on. 400 million just a couple of months ago is no joke. I mean, they clearly have plans, or they're not just bullish. I mean, I think the valuation was nearly 3 billion or something like that. They're very bullish about the space and how much headroom it has to grow, and they're raising that kind of money at those kind of valuations. I think one of the questions asked about the betting space, Darsh and Vatsal talked about, is there a saturation in the fantasy and betting market? No, not anytime soon. If you look at global drivers, you talk about what's been happening in the US, especially when it comes to sports betting. That market is going to set the trend, which I think the rest of the world is eyeing very carefully. When the US has legalized sports betting at breakneck speed. From 2018, I think it was New Jersey, which was the first state to apply. I mean, Nevada always had sports betting, legal sports betting. But the moment New Jersey went to, or that there was the court ruling in New Jersey which said that open the floodgates for sports betting, I think it's 22 or 23 states now have legalized it already. There are another 20 or so which have some sort of legislation yeah, already towards it. And not just that, I mean, that's on the legal side, but what action we're seeing as a result of that legal or that legislation is that all the broadcasters, all the sports leagues, everybody is getting in on the betting game in a big way. There was a report I read which talked about, I think in 1 month for, I think it was the state of Florida, I'm not sure, where over 100 million in sports betting revenue to the state. So that's $100 million of revenue in a month collected in terms of taxes just from sports betting, right? So that just gives you a scale of, and this is early doors. It was just when it had been legalized less than like 60 days before in that state. So that's just to give you a sense of how much money we're talking about that it can contribute to the economy. Uh, and the broadcasters are really priming for that. They're seeing a lot of betting dedicated broadcasts, a lot of like with basically an entire feed, the betting focused commentators, betting focused graphics. So it's a parallel broadcast to what you see normally. I think a lot of those trends you could easily see in other markets. You could see a fantasy focused broadcast. I wouldn't be surprised if that's something like that happened in India, just given the amount of money that is being spent. So, yeah, point being, is there a saturation? Is this market going to become, yeah, not going to grow fast? Not anytime soon. In terms of emerging business models and technologies, what's all you talked about that? Look, at least as for now, it's the daily fantasy format. It's, again, tried and tested. What we saw DraftKings and FanDuels do way back in 2014, 15, 16, till they graduated to become the betting behemoths that they are. FanDuel got acquired by Flutter. DraftKings IPO'd in a big way last year. Those business models are pretty straightforward. It's you pay to participate, and if you win, you cash out big, right? So, I mean, that's the core business model. Now, within that, what is the models of what types of games that you will introduce? Are you selecting full 11s? Are you selecting key players? Are you selecting a pool of double up players? I mean, those are the smaller game modalities things which you're forever going to see innovation on. People are not going to play the same boring game again and again. But the core underlying principle, I think that will will stay rock solid. It's the features and sets above that that will continue to grow. Now, I'll tell you what, I'm going to jump in here and we do another question round later. But yeah, I think I spoke about it briefly, but will there be a lot of innovation in fantasy sport? I think there will, this because of the sheer money that there is in the segment. As investors take the space more seriously, as startups take the space more seriously, you're going to see more innovation continuously grow. All right, so that's one bit about fantasy sports in India. Yeah. What's next? We talked about a trend in esports in China. Now, China is a very interesting market for esports because it's dominated by a couple of players. I want to talk about Tencent specifically because Tencent is not just big in China, Tencent is big everywhere. Tencent is about an $800 billion company, and you all heard the word Tencent, but how much ownership that they have in esports is kind of astounding. They own Riot Games completely. They bought them out small, eventually bought them out completely. Riot Games is League of Legends. They have a large majority. They have a not majority, but they have a significant stake in Supercell, which owns Clash of Clans. They own a stake in Epic Games, which own Fortnite. They own a stake in Activision Blizzard, which holds Call of Duty, and they own Discord, or they have a stake in Discord, and they have a stake in the two biggest streaming companies, Douyu and Huya in China. So when you think of all these games, League of Legends, Clash of Clans, Fortnite, COD, Call of Duty, these are some of the biggest names, if not the biggest names going on in the world of esports and gaming today. And all of them held by one company. So it's very strategic how Tencent have positioned themselves in the space. That they really want to control what's happening in the market. And one of those ways of exerting that control was through the facilitated merger of Douyu and Huya, which were competing companies along with Shishu, along with some other streaming platforms in China. Um, these were competing companies. And just because they had the same investor, we've seen this in the past happen in India, certainly, and in other parts of the world as well, where one investor holds a stake in two competing companies with eventually the idea of merging them. That's what happened here. Duya and Huya were two listed companies separating. They came together to create one combined $10 billion esports streaming entity. And why did they do this? Why did they say that no, it's about time that these guys stopped fighting each other and came together to pool in resources? Is because mobile streaming, especially mobile streaming, is a very, very attractive space in China. I mean, there are enough and more numbers. The market is valued at crazy figures. It's expected to hit $7.5 billion in 2022, and obviously continue to grow from there. And more importantly, there's the Chinese version of TikTok, which is Douyin, which has about 600 million users apparently. They are also talking about entering the game streaming market, especially for mobile. So there's a lot of activity expected in the in a fast-growing segment. So Tencent is almost like kind of putting their elbows out and saying, "Hey, we want to consolidate and really own this space," which is why for them it seems like the Douyu and Huya merger made sense. And also, this market is unique in the way it interacts with its users. Unlike, uh, I mean, direct donations to streamers has been a big thing, but a lot of streamers also make money through advertising on their streams, right? Through running subscriptions to different products. China was kind of the leader in this, that it promoted or these platforms promoted and facilitated direct interaction between the streamer and its audience, and to get direct donations. I mean, some of these streamers I was reading about I think the average figure for I think the top 10 streamers was $10 million a year. $10 million a year that a streamer is making. That's a lot of money, and all facilitated through direct donations. So what's important for the platform is where this donation happens. You have to own the streamer and own the audience, because every time a contribution is made, you take a small percentage of that contribution for facilitating it, and then the billing really racks up. So this has been the play that's been happening across the region, from Tencent. And again, the biggest companies, Douyu and Huya, I just mentioned about them being merged. There's Chushu, which is another mobile streaming company. But you go through this list, there are Inba TV, which has been big and kind of on the cusp for a while. Barena, which I know has some presence in Singapore and stuff as well. Look, there are a lot of companies here, and to be honest, my biggest problem is that we hunt and we hunt and we hunt, and we're not even sure whether these funding figures are completely accurate because of, and we were talking about this earlier, the nature of the black box that China is, especially when it comes to investment figures. But we try to pick up all the credible sources that we have, and we arrive at these numbers. So it's quite likely that the investment in in these startups is even higher than the figures that you see here. All right, so that's one nice big spiel on esports and streaming in China. And the reason why this is important is because, as we said earlier with the innovative formats, China sets a lot of trends. And through Tencent, you're likely to see more and more innovation in this esports streaming, direct streaming format, which the rest of the world can learn, which maybe Twitch will pick up things from. I mean, we've heard a lot about Microsoft trying and not trying. With Mixer, they weren't so successful. With other platforms, they might be. Let's see how that goes. Facebook gaming, of course. Whether any of these trends that you see here start getting pulled over into other esports and gaming streaming platforms. All right, that takes me to my third and final trend that I want to talk about today, which is fitness. Yes, we know everybody, most of you as well, have probably found some sort of app that you've downloaded. I would actually hazard a guess to say everyone on here has at least downloaded one app over the course of the last year to try to do some workout at home. It's just been a thing during the pandemic. That's pretty much either people have become expert cooks, or they've taken up some sort of fitness platform. Well, in Asia Pacific specifically, this has been an even bigger trend. I'll read you some stats around market penetration, and you'll see why. Now, according to the Global Wellness Institute, which is accredited body in the space, which published this little graphic that I've shown you there, which talks about how much Asia Pacific is growing at compared to other regions, and what the fitness market or physical activity market will likely be in 2023. Physical activity, just to be clear, is clarified as somebody who at least does one activity per week. One activity can even be um, walking or jogging or some sort of light activity, but at least once a week they do some sort of fitness activity. That's how the Global Wellness Institute defined it, right? But keeping that in mind, how much, what is the percentage of the population in most countries that does this? Well, I can tell you that's where Asia Pacific really stands out. The penetration in the Asia Pacific region is really low. It's only about 47 percent. India is even lower at 15%. Not that surprising, yeah, if you think about it. The way Indians are, we love our food and we kind of a bit lazy on the fitness side. Australia, conversely, is a penetration of 84%. That 84% of the population in Australia does something at least once a week, which also I'm inclined to believe, uh, knowing that Aussies, a few Aussie friends that I do, and just the nature of Australian sports, like they love their similar South Africans, Australians, etc. US at 59%, China at 49%. So the numbers kind of wane off. And the average across the region in Asia Pacific was 47, as I said. So the market penetration for fitness is much lower across the region, which is why there are a lot of activity as global fitness becomes a trend, again, driven by the US. There's so much happening in the space in the US from all the apps. Ben mentioned it earlier, from the Pelotons and the mirrors and tonals of the world, those are on the hardware side. It's become this big trend that's really driving across the world, really, and we're seeing that in Asia as well. Lots of funding activity driven by this low market penetration, which leaves a lot of headroom for growth. And I think we had a question earlier about software and hardware. While we've seen a lot of hardware companies in the US, in Asia, we've seen a bit of a mix, and I'll show you what that's like. I mean, these are some of the top funded platforms. Um, and you'll see, I mean, there's a reasonable split between hardware and software, but it seems like the software startups are growing a bit faster. India had the had the highest increase in app downloads for fitness app downloads for anywhere in the world over the period of 2020, 157%. So basically, like one, 2.5 times what is was before. Japan was at nearly 67%. The global average for increase in app downloads was for fitness app downloads was 46%. So keeping in mind this mega trend of fitness being adopted, first the apps, India and generally in the region, there was a lot of activity. But in terms of fitness, sorry, in terms of software and hardware, yeah, you'll see Keep, which is an at-home fitness app, a really rich one. I haven't used it, but I've seen it a bit. CureFit, I have used myself. CureFit is a holistic platform. They obviously do at-home fitness, but they also do nutrition. They're also big on mindfulness. They talk about meditation, mental health, all of that stuff. So they really talk about fitness and an end-to-end part in an end-to-end way. Sorry, Kudun, which is another Chinese app, is an app. So they have a lot of at-home fitness stuff, but they also have some devices, some trackers and things that you can buy and get connected. But if you look to on the right-hand side in the little box at the bottom, you'll see companies from other countries as well. You'll see Think in there and Bonks from Japan. We saw and Nook One. We've seen companies in Taiwan called Wonder Size. We've seen companies in Kuwait called Hot Technologies, which are not on this list. They've also raised significant funding over this period, at least 1 million plus in funding over the last years, say year plus. So we've seen this mega trend of fitness kind of really grow throughout the region. And a lot of those drivers are, as I said, the low market penetration, which makes it easier. Like any app with a good customer acquisition strategy will at least get their initial downloads. And whether they will retain, whether they can sustain that growth, that is a bigger question, which I guess we will see only over time. Fitness as a market is, I mean, there's so much interesting stuff happening in the fitness segment. We can go on and on about it, ranging from Excel gaming. I think the combination of fitness and esports slash gaming, I think that's going to be a big trend. We've seen companies in the US, companies like Zwift, introduce that concept where fitness is connected or access connected to gaming to make it a bit more competitive. I think we're going to see that a bit more in across the world and